My name is Agomoh, Dr. Agomoh, and I work as Executive Director of PRAWA, which is Prisoners Rehabilitation and Welfare Action. We are a member of ASET. PRAWA is also a member of ASSN, and I serve as one of the executive committee members of ASSN, which is the African Security Sector Network. At PRAWA, we work to promote justice and security sector reform, as well as social development and rehabilitation. In the course of our work, it has become very clear that prisons and correctional services is quite neglected. It's a neglected area within the whole issue of security and justice sector reform. It is important that this area needs to be addressed if we must have a comprehensive intervention. Issues relating to terrorism, management of terror suspects, issues relating to radicalism are all issues that are of relevance in this discourse. Not to mention the whole question of the formal and informal sector in terms of controlling people who are processed into the justice system and out of the justice system. In many African jurisdictions, we find critical problems raising and including issues relating to gross human rights abuses, overcrowding in prisons, overuse of pre-trial detention, to mention but a few. There are critical issues relating to the impact on the wider society when persons who are innocent are processed within the criminal justice system, because we do find those instances. This becomes more critical where in many jurisdictions in Africa we have persons who have been awaiting trial over a long period of time, many 10 years, 11 years, 15 years, 20 years, 5 years. And given the fact that many of the constitutions in some of these jurisdictions speak of the issue of fair trial, speak of the issue of fairness, speak of the issue of providing legal representation, apart from the fact that because of the violations in terms of arbitrary arrests, extrajudicial killings, torture, inhuman and degrading treatment, that citizens suffer in the hands of law enforcement agents. We find an influx of many persons who are innocent being found in our prisons and various detention facilities. Not to speak of the fact that in so doing, many get to be more criminalized into very many deviant behaviors and crime, even if they were innocent in the first instance. Again, it is important to mention that there are persons who are in prisons who have committed some offenses, but these offenses are not such that requires custodial treatment. The underutilization of non-custodial, or what you can call alternative to imprisonment, brings us to another issue. In many jurisdictions, and indeed in the African continent, the traditional criminal justice systems are such that promotes a comprehensive and holistic tripartite process, respect for victims, inclusion of the communities, and treatment of offenders in such a way that they will not reoffend when they go back. Unfortunately, in many instances, we have lost this. So therefore, we have a justice system that the society do not believe in, a justice system that many believe that it's not justice for all. Indeed, many poor persons are alienated from the justice process. Justice indeed becomes justice for the highest bidder, whereby we have lost the whole question of reconciliation and transformation and restorative justice models. There are no longer increased use of victim offender mediation, as was known in our traditional criminal justice system. Community service and many other non-custodial sanctions becomes something that has no wide implementation across the continent, despite the fact that this is the justice as people knew it in the traditional settings. And because of this, many communities, many citizens are looking at alternatives. They are resorting to self-help. They are dealing also with alternative means of dispute resolution. Therefore, having a justice that does not serve the masses. Indeed, this is something of great concern. Do I then mention also that you can also find in many of the prisons those who are indeed guilty of the offenses as they have been charged. But unfortunately, the regime in many of the prison services or prison systems have failed to provide adequate rehabilitation, adequate programs that will identify the sources of their antisocial behaviors, and adequate programs that will enhance their full reintegration into the community. Therefore, we have a high reoffending rate in Africa. We have many instances where the effect of incarceration, reaches far-reaching consequences, including to the families and what we will call the silent prisoners, the prisoners' families, who oftentimes suffer the untold hardship of the long incarceration of their loved ones in prison. Because everyone you find in prison one day will get out of prison unless he dies or she dies in prison. Therefore, it's imperative that we must be concerned about what happens to them, at least because of the security and community health of the society we live in. Because if we don't, we increases insecurity in our communities, we increases crime in our communities, and these have gross implications for security sector reform. I also want to mention that of serious concern is the whole question of the use of corrections in peacekeeping missions. In many post-conflict and fragile states, we have a situation whereby the prisons and correctional facilities, just like the justice sector, is completely broken down. We saw that in the instance of Liberia, Sierra Leone, and indeed in many others, including Democratic Republic of Congo and Burundi. These problems that are faced by the prisons and correctional services in these areas are completely of grave magnitude. We're talking about complete breakdown in the facilities with little or no adequate capacity in terms of personnel, issues relating to lack of water, lack of hygiene, increase in deaths, and so many other challenges that I think that is necessary for us to begin to turn the lenses of security sector reform towards. It is also important to mention that there are many persons we find in prisons who ought not to be there. In many jurisdictions in Africa, we're still imprisoning mentally ill persons, persons living with mental disabilities, who have not committed any offenses. In some jurisdictions, like in Nigeria, they are classified both as civil lunatics and the so-called criminal lunatics. In this regard, the civil lunatics means those who are mentally ill but who have committed absolutely no offenses. Therefore, the question is, why should these people be found in our prisons, or the so-called prison asylum, rather than treating or processing them in therapeutic environment like hospitals? Many are faced with this because they cannot afford the health facilities and health services. They are not free, and many of these people are poor. We need to be aware that every society has the kind of prisons and justice sector that it deserves. In other words, what we find in prison is a reflection of the wider society. We must begin to look at prisons as something that has a very close connection with the community. Because the population, or prison population, or populations in our various detention facilities are such populations that move with great frequency between each other. In many instances, someone can be a prisoner today and tomorrow is out in the community, and you can be somebody in the community and tomorrow you're arrested and you're back in prison. We must be concerned about how the activities in prison have imperatives or impact on the wider society. Security is key. Rehabilitation and reform is key. And we cannot achieve this if we do not take a holistic perspective. We must understand that we cannot promote human security if we do not look at what happens in the justice sector as well as the prisons all over the continent of Africa. We need to build the capacities of persons who work in prisons and correctional services. We need to make sure that the services that they provide are such that respect international standards and are compliant to the obligations, international and regional obligations that their countries may have been signatories to. We need to ensure that torture, inhuman and degrading treatment is not practiced. That persons are not arbitrarily arrested and detained or incarcerated. That persons are not extrajudicially killed. And that forced disappearance should not be the thing that we need to live with. We must put an end to impunity. To do this requires a comprehensive approach. Approach that recognizes that there is an input that needs to come from the state, as well as an input that needs to come from the academia and the civil society. We all must work together to make this happen. We can no longer treat this area of work in isolation. For as we do that, we work into our own disadvantage. I'm therefore using this platform to say that given the experience of PRAWA and some of the lessons we've learned, this holistic approach is what we are recommending. A holistic approach that recognizes that persons who are processed within the prisons and detention facilities are human beings that can be members of our communities any moment, even though at the moment they may be in prisons. And therefore, we must commit to making this work. It is therefore important also that the various countries and parliaments and governments must make adequate budgetary allocations to ensure that justice parameters and the activities of prisons and correctional facilities in their various jurisdictions are achieved in line with international standards. In the same vein, we must promote activities both in prisons and out of prisons in a way that also enhances effective coordination of the justice sector, effective coordination of the various law enforcement agencies, and there must be adequate oversight. Speaking of oversight, we are recommending that a complete entrenching of both internal and external oversight mechanisms to make sure that this work can work well. Training and capacity building is key. We need to change attitude. It may take time, but we need to change attitude and we need to teach what needs to be done as well as monitor the impact of those who are working in these services. We must put a searchlight to ensure that violations of human rights and international conventions are not a thing that is in occurrence in the various jurisdictions. This is a call for all to work towards this very important dimension. Don't forget, prisons and correctional facilities are a key part of the justice and security dimensions. And therefore, if you want a safe community, if you want a comprehensive security sector reform or transformation, you must think holistically. And this is the only way that we can meet adequate success. Thank you.
Thank you.